The salvage contract had been very clear about one thing: do not engage with anything that might shoot back, scream for help, or negotiate its own price. He had agreed with that philosophy completely. It was a comforting philosophy, a safe philosophy. A philosophy that did not involve him currently drifting behind a slaver convoy with his engines barely whispering and his better judgment filing formal complaints in the background. Just observing, he muttered to himself as if the empty cockpit cared. Professional curiosity, that's all. The convoy moved like a chain of dull metal insects, slow and deliberate, their hulls patched with mismatched alloys. He zoomed in with his cracked display, expecting cargo manifests, maybe black market fuel, possibly something he could pretend not to recognize. Instead, he saw cages. He leaned closer, then immediately leaned back like the image might reach out and slap him. "Nope," he said. "Not my problem, definitely not my problem." His ship, which had no official name and several unofficial ones he wasn't proud of, emitted a soft warning beep as if disagreeing. He tapped the console. "You don't get opinions, you barely get power." He should have left then, he knew it. He even started turning the ship away, fingers moving with admirable commitment to self-preservation. That was when one of the cages rotated slightly, just enough for him to see her. At first, she looked human. That was the unsettling part. Not identical, no, there was something too precise about her stillness, too controlled. And then there were the ears. Long, elegant, curved back like they had decided evolution should be more artistic. She stood among the others, restrained, yet somehow less captive than everything around her. Their eyes met through layers of vacuum, metal, and very questionable life choices. He froze. "Well," he said after a long second, "that's unfortunate." He stared at the controls. The controls stared back, silently judging him. "I'm not getting involved," he continued. "Absolutely not. I value my life, I like breathing. Breathing is one of my top hobbies." His hand moved anyway. The engines shifted from a whisper to a cautious hum. He winced. This is a terrible idea. This is the kind of idea people regret in very dramatic last words. The approach was clumsy from the start. His ship drifted too close, clipped a loose antenna, and sent a small cascade of sparks across the slaver hull. "Smooth," he muttered. "Incredibly subtle. A ghost, that's what I am." Alarms lit up on the convoy almost immediately. Right, of course they have alarms. Why wouldn't they have alarms? He improvised something resembling a plan, which mostly involved flying faster than his ship was comfortable with and pretending he understood the weapons system. A pulse shot fired wide, another accidentally hit a cargo lock, and suddenly one of the cages began to detach. "That was intentional," he said quickly. "Very intentional." The detached cage spun slowly into open space. He maneuvered toward it, nearly overshooting, then correcting with a burst that rattled every loose component on board. "Hold together," he told the ship. "We're being heroic, try to look like it." He latched onto the cage with a magnetic clamp that squealed in protest. For a moment, everything went quiet except for his heartbeat pounding in his ears. Then the cage door slid open. She stepped out with a calm that didn't belong in a collapsing escape. Up close, the difference was clearer. The faint shimmer beneath her skin, the unnatural steadiness in her gaze. And those ears, unmistakably alien, catching the dim starlight like sculpted glass. "Thank you," she said, her voice even, almost curious. He blinked. "You're welcome," he replied. "I'd like to clarify this was a limited-time offer. No guarantees, no refunds." Behind them, the convoy roared to life in angry pursuit. She glanced past him, then back, entirely unbothered. "We should leave." "Yes," he said quickly, scrambling toward the cockpit. "That was always the plan, a very strong plan, one of my best." As the ship lurched forward, barely outrunning incoming fire, he risked a glance at her. She stood steady despite the chaos, watching everything with quiet calculation. He swallowed. "Just out of curiosity," he said, forcing a weak smile, "you're not secretly someone important, right?" She looked at him, and for a brief moment, something like amusement touched her expression. "No," she said. He exhaled in relief. Then she added, "Not in a way that will make your life simple." He stared ahead as another blast shook the ship. "Fantastic," he whispered. The ship stopped shaking long enough for him to realize he was still alive, which he considered a modest but meaningful success. He didn't slow down immediately. Experience had taught him that survival liked to wait a few seconds before changing its mind. Only after the stars stretched back into normal shapes did he ease his grip on the controls. "Okay," he said, breathing out. "We're not dead. This is already exceeding expectations." Behind him, she had taken a seat without asking, as if the ship had always belonged to her. Not arrogantly, not rudely, just with a quiet certainty that made him oddly aware of how temporary everything he owned actually was. "You fly unpredictably," she said. He turned halfway in his chair. "That's one way to say it. Another way is brilliant improvisation under pressure. I prefer that one." "It worked," she replied. He pointed at her. "Exactly, you see it." The ship let out a soft, irritated hum, and a panel flickered twice before going dark. He glanced at it. "Ignore that, that's just personality. She does that when she's impressed." She tilted her head slightly, studying the console, then him. "You speak to machines as if they listen." "They don't listen," he said. "They judge." "There's a difference." Silence settled for a moment, not uncomfortable, just unfamiliar. He realized he hadn't asked the most basic question, which felt like an oversight considering he had just committed several crimes on her behalf. "So," he began, tapping a few controls that may or may not have done anything useful. "Do you have a name, or should I keep calling you unexpected life-altering decision?" She looked at him again, that same measured calm in her expression. "My name would not translate cleanly in your language." "Of course it wouldn't," he sighed. "That would be too easy." "You may call me Lyra," she said after a brief pause. "Lyra," he repeated, testing it. "That's good, simple, manageable, not ominous at all." He leaned back slightly, then immediately leaned forward again as a warning light blinked to life. He hit it with his palm until it stopped. "Also normal," he added quickly. Lyra watched the display without concern. "They will continue searching." "Who, the slavers?" he asked. "Because I'd really prefer if they didn't. I already used up my daily supply of bad decisions." "Not only them," she said. "Others will have noticed." He froze. "Others," he repeated carefully. "That's a very broad and deeply unhelpful word. They will be more dangerous." He rubbed his face. "Fantastic. I rescue one person, and suddenly I'm on everyone's guest list." She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she reached toward the console. For a second, he almost told her not to touch anything, but curiosity won. The moment her fingers brushed the surface, the flickering system stabilized. The dim lights brightened, the hum of the engines smoothed out, and even the stubborn panel he had been fighting earlier came back to life as if embarrassed by its previous behavior. He stared. "Did you just fix my ship?" he asked. "I assisted it," she said. "You assisted it," he repeated. "I've been assisting it for 3 years and it still threatens me daily." She withdrew her hand, as if the improvement meant nothing. He leaned closer to the console, squinting. "You're not going to explain how you did that, are you?" "No, of course not," he said. "Why would anything in my life suddenly make sense?" Another silence followed, but this one carried something heavier beneath it. He felt it before he understood it, the shift, the subtle awareness that the situation was larger than he had allowed himself to believe. He glanced at her again. "So, hypothetically," he said, keeping his tone light, "if someone were important, like dangerously important, and they got kidnapped by slavers, that would be a big problem, right?" "Yes," she said. "And hypothetically, if some incredibly intelligent and very handsome pilot rescued that person without knowing who they were." "That would complicate his future," she replied. He nodded slowly. "Right, complicated future. That's exactly what I was afraid of." He looked out at the endless stretch of space ahead, then he didn't sleep, which he told himself was a strategic decision, and not the result of realizing he had accidentally kidnapped himself into interstellar politics. The ship drifted in a quiet stretch of space, systems humming with a suspicious level of competence since Lyra had touched them. He kept glancing at the console like it might start asking her for permission instead of him. "This is new," he muttered. "I used to be the most important person on this ship. Granted, I was also the only person, but still." Lyra stood near the viewport, watching the stars with that same stillness that made everything feel like it was moving around her instead. He had spent the last hour pretending not to notice the subtle changes, signals flickering at the edge of detection, routes recalculating without his input, the quiet sense that something vast had begun to close in. "So," he said finally, breaking the silence, "this is the part where you tell me the full truth, right? Preferably the version that doesn't get me vaporized." She turned toward him. "You already suspect it." "I suspect a lot of things," he replied, "most of them bad for my long-term survival." "I am the last heir of a unified throne," she said. "My people are divided. Many would use me to claim power. Others would destroy me to prevent it." He stared at her, then slowly nodded. "Right, of course, you're royalty, not just regular complicated, legendary complicated. You chose to involve yourself," she said. "I tripped into it," he corrected. "There's a difference." A soft tone echoed through the ship, not an alarm, worse, a recognition signal. He looked at the console, then back at her. "Please tell me that's not what I think it is." "It is," she said. Outside, space shifted. Not visually at first, but in presence. Then the first ships appeared, emerging like shadows deciding to become real. Sleek, precise, far beyond anything he had ever seen up close. They surrounded his small vessel without aggression, which somehow made it more terrifying. He let out a slow breath. "Well," he said, "this feels like the exact opposite of staying unnoticed." The comm system activated on its own. A voice filled the cockpit, layered with authority. "Air confirmed, awaiting directive." He looked at Lyra. "Directive," he repeated. "That sounds important. You should probably have one." She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stepped forward, placing her hand on the console again. This time, the entire ship seemed to respond, not just the systems. The light shifted, the air itself feeling sharper, aligned. "I was taken because they believed I would run," she said quietly, "that I would avoid what I am." "And?" he asked. She looked at him, and for the first time, there was something unguarded in her expression. Not uncertainty, choice. "I will not run," she said. The words settled into the space between them, heavy and irreversible. He nodded once, slower than usual. "Good," he said, "because I'm a terrible runner, physically and emotionally." Something almost like a smile touched her lips. She turned back to the console. "Stand down," she commanded. Outside, the ships shifted instantly, their formation changing from containment to alignment. Not hunters anymore, guardians. He blinked. "That worked," he said. "That really worked." "Yes," she replied. He leaned back, staring at the display, at the fleet now moving with her rather than against her. "So that's it?" he asked. "You take your throne. I go back to salvaging things that don't try to kill me." He expected her to agree. It would have been simpler. Instead, she said, "You could." He frowned slightly. "That doesn't sound convincing." "It is an option," she said, "but not the only one." He looked at her, really looked this time. Not just the alien details, the impossible calm, but the weight she carried and the space she somehow made for him within it. "You're asking me to stay," he said. "I am allowing you to choose," she replied. He exhaled, glancing around his ship, the patched walls, the stubborn panels, the life he had kept small on purpose. Then he looked back at the fleet waiting outside. At her. "Well," he said slowly, "my life was very simple before you. Quiet, predictable, extremely low chance of becoming part of galactic history." He stood up, stretching slightly as if preparing for something much smaller than what was actually happening. "I'm starting to think," he continued, "that maybe simple was overrated." She watched him silent. He smiled, a little crooked, a little uncertain, but real. "Besides," he added, "someone has to make sure you don't accidentally fix every ship in the galaxy and put me out of a job." That faint smile returned to her, clearer now. "Then stay," she said. Outside, the fleet shifted course, no longer searching, no longer hunting, moving forward. And for the first time, he didn't feel like he was drifting. The first time someone bowed to him, he checked behind his shoulder to see who they were actually greeting. There was no one there. Just him, standing awkwardly beside Lyra as an entire chamber of beings who could probably dismantle planets with paperwork alone, lowered their heads in perfect synchronization. "No," he whispered under his breath, "this is definitely a mistake." "It is not," Lyra said quietly without looking at him. "They bowed," he insisted. "People don't bow to me. Last week, a vending unit refused to accept my credits out of principle." "That unit was damaged," she replied. "It said that about me too." The chamber rose again, attention returning to Lyra. The air carried a weight he could almost hear, like reality itself was waiting to see what she would decide. He shifted his stance, trying not to look like someone who had absolutely no business being here. Days had passed since the fleet found them. Days in which he had learned more about galactic politics than he ever wanted, including the fascinating detail that everyone smiled right before attempting something catastrophic. Assassination attempts had been subtle, elegant, and in one case, disguised as a ceremonial drink that tried to dissolve his cup. Still offended about that, he muttered. "You survived," Lyra said. "I would like to upgrade from survived to not regularly targeted," he replied. Despite everything, he had stayed. Not because it was safe, nothing about this was safe, but because leaving had started to feel smaller than staying. That realization bothered him more than any threat. Lyra stepped forward, the room adjusting around her presence as if acknowledging something fundamental. "The division ends," she said, her voice carrying without effort. "Not through force but through alignment. We rebuild what was fractured." There were murmurs, subtle shifts of disagreement, calculation. He recognized the look in a few of them, the kind that preceded bad decisions wrapped in polite language. "Here we go," he whispered. "This is the part where someone does something dramatic and I regret everything again." It happened faster than he expected. A figure broke formation, a device flashing to life with a sharp, rising hum. He didn't think. That was the surprising part. He didn't weigh the risks or calculate the odds. He just moved. "Not today," he muttered, stepping directly into the path of something that looked very committed to ending conversations permanently. The impact never came. The device flickered, then died in the attacker's hand, systems collapsing as if reality itself had decided to reject the idea. Lyra hadn't moved much, just a slight shift, her hand raised, fingers barely curling. Silence fell, heavier this time. The attacker dropped to their knees, not defeated, but overwhelmed by something larger than resistance. The room changed in that moment, not in structure, but in certainty. He blinked, then looked down at himself. "I had a whole plan," he said. "It was a bad plan, but it was emotionally committed." Lyra lowered her hand, turning slightly toward him. "You did not hesitate." He shrugged, a little breathless now that the moment had passed. "I'm starting to notice that about myself. It's very inconvenient." Something softer passed between them, brief but real. The chamber settled. One by one, the others lowered themselves again, not out of protocol this time, but acceptance. The resistance, the fractures, the quiet threats. They didn't vanish, but they shifted, losing their certainty. Later, when the chamber emptied and the echoes faded, he leaned against the railing overlooking a horizon that wasn't quite a planet and wasn't quite a structure. "So," he said, "you have a throne now, an actual one, I assume. Very impressive, probably uncomfortable." "It is not about the throne," she said, stepping beside him. "Right," he nodded. "Symbolism, responsibility, existential pressure." "I get it." He glanced at her, then out at the vastness beyond. "You know, I used to measure success by whether my ship exploded that day." "And now," she asked, he thought about it. Not the dangers or the scale of what he had stepped into, but the choice he had made to stop running from things just because they were larger than him. "Now," he said slowly, "I think I measure it by whether I run away or stay." "And you stayed," she said. "Yeah," he replied, a small smile forming, still surprised about that. A distant signal pulsed through the space around them. Not a threat this time, but a beginning. Movement, coordination, something rebuilding itself piece by piece. He pushed himself off the railing. "So what happens next?" Lyra looked out at the same horizon, her expression calm, but no longer distant. "We move forward," she said. He nodded once, more certain than he had ever been in his life. "Good," he replied, "because I'm done drifting."